All right. Hello, everybody. Today, I've got something short but kind of like weird. I don't know. I don't believe in like fate or anything like that. And so, but like at the same time, sometimes there are things that like fit together that don't seem to fit together. But then when you look at it from like a bird's eye view, they fit together in a weird way. Like I wonder if there's something in my brain that's like, genetic or goodness knows what, maybe epigenetic, that like, predisposes me to enjoy Japanese media type stuff. Anime, manga, samurai movies, etc. I sometimes I wonder because like we all know that if you look at like Japanese media, that the aesthetic sense is just different, right? There's just something like if you look at it and then you look at like an equivalent, European or American television show, and this is true even like American versus European shows. There's differences, of course, but like there's something weird about Japanese media in some ways, even compared to like both American and European. Like this is even further out, and like it's weird because like when I was a little kid, like really little, like 3, 4 years old kind of age range, one of my favorite cartoon shows that was on TV was actually an adaptation of Antoine de Saint I don't know how to pronounce his name, Exupéry, his book The Little Prince. And I loved that show when I was a kid. It was on TV in the early 80s or in the mid 80s, I guess. And I watched it all the time whenever I could find it on TV. And it like captured my imagination way more than a lot of the other cartoon stuff. Of all the cartoon shows I watched back then, that's the only one that I remember watching, is a way to put it. And it wasn't until like 20 years later that I like discovered that the cartoon show that I was watching was actually an adapted and dubbed over anime. Like it was actually produced in Japan, dubbed and brought over here in the U.S. And of course, all of the Japanese like influence, aside from the like general aesthetic of the show, were taken out basically, right? This was something that was really common in the 80s and the early 90s about translations, is that they would pull out, because we see bad localizations today, but we had bad localizations in the 80s and 90s as well, and where they would like take out anything that suggested that it was from a different country, kind of thing. Even so late as like mid 90s, right? The original release in the U.S. of Wild Arms on the PlayStation, there were songs for that game that had vocals in, I think, the Japanese version, and they cut those vocals out for the purposes of the American releases. It happened in Wild Arms 2 as well. The intro to Wild Arms 2 in Japan had vocals, and they took them out for the American version of those. But like, still at some point, it's weird that I was like, I really liked The Little Prince. There was a show that was on the Canadian Broadcasting Channel when I was a little kid too, called The Bush Baby, which turns out that's also an anime that was adapted and dubbed over, and all the Japanese influence was kind of wiped out of it. And then like I ended up in a school, in elementary school, where we started in 4th grade, where we started learning Japanese. There was just so much weird stuff. And then here's even the next thing. I had a Nintendo. I played Nintendo a lot. I liked Nintendo RPGs. But the thing that I wanted the most one year was a copy of Wizardry 2, Knight of Diamonds, for NES. And I still have a copy of it somewhere. It's wrapped up to keep that aged cardboard relatively safe. But I still have it. It was one of those games that I got at the point where I was starting to not destroy the boxes of games that I was getting. But like, Wizardry is one of those things also that it had popularity here in the U.S. Let's not exaggerate things. It was popular here in the U.S., but it is by no means as popular in the U.S. or as happily remembered in the U.S. as it was in Japan. In Japan, Wizardry was huge. The first-person, grid-based, map-it-out-yourself dungeon crawler was enormous. It was a sensation. And because of bad translations, a lot of things got through, and like the Japanese treated wizardry as like completely serious, whereas it in America, if you read the documents that it came with and stuff, it was not serious at all. To give an example, in the American version, there's a weapon that you can call the Blade Cuisinart, and like it's a clear reference to like Cuisinart food processors, and in Japan they like wrote a thing. Oh, it was made by the great blacksmith Cuisinart and yada yada yada. It's like, well, that's not. They sucked all the humor out of it and they made it into this serious thing, and then they just kind of ran with it. And like the amount of so in America we had like 8 mainstream wizardry games. I think there were like a couple of minor spin-offs, but like nothing huge. And like it was always kind of a niche series. It was competing with Might and Magic. It was competing with Ultima. It was competing with other similar series that I can't remember the names of at the time. But like in Japan, Wizardry had tons of spin-offs. There were Wizardry games that were originally made for like the Game Boy. I have some of the PlayStation ones. Like we have Wizardry Empire, which can I get no glare on it? There we go. Wizardry Empire. And like this is an original Wizardry game that was just made in Japan and never released here in the US. We have Wizardry Dimgwil as well. Here's can I? There's so much glare. I don't know. There we go. Wizardry Dimgwil, which is another one. And then we had like this company that was called Microsoft back in the day. And they released they're called Experience Inc. now, I believe. I'm pretty sure. And they made 2 spin-off Wizardry games as well, with more of an anime aesthetic to them as well for PS2. And it turned out that they like had gotten the wrong license, or they had gotten it from the wrong person, and so they had to like rename their Wizardry games to like the Experience. They had to rename their company to Experience, and then like rename the games to like the Zith series, which is those are now available here in the U.S. They got released for PlayStation Portable, or maybe it was Vita. And then they were ported to like PC and stuff. And then there was a company that actually went to the trouble to get the correct Wizardry license in Japan and made 2 other, Wizardry alternative games. And like, I mean, like, why did I love Wizardry and treat it like I loved Wizardry and I treated it seriously as a kid, and Japan loved Wizardry and treated it seriously around that same time. They did the same thing with Ultima in a way. Like, there were NES ports for Ultima Exodus, which is technically Ultima 3, Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar, and Ultima 5, Warriors of Destiny. Those were on the NES. And then there was False Prophet, Ultima 6, on the SNES. And they even had a port of the Black Gate, Ultima 7, on the SNES as well. And those did come out in America, but again, they were not big sellers. Those big CRPGs. First off, the ports weren't very good, right? Like the ports of Warriors of Destiny is practically unplayable. The False Prophet for NES is pretty good, actually. That's a pretty good port. It might even be superior to the PC version because you get a bigger window of stuff that you can see on the screen, as opposed to your little, what is it, like a 7x7 grid that you get to look at when you're playing the PC version. But Ultima was really big in Japan as well. There were Ultima spin-off games. There were Ultima. There was a lot of like Ultima stuff. But the one thing I found that was really neat was they made, apparently, the author here is Yuko Tanaka, or Tanaka Yuko, and they made a full manga version of their interpretation of Quest of the Avatar. Now, here's the funny thing about Quest of the Avatar, right? In the original PC version of Quest of the Avatar, right? The introduction makes it clear that it's kind of like you are, unfulfilled or like not disappointed, like disgruntled maybe a little bit, or you're not happy, and you go kind of walking through a forested field, and you find this book and you find this stone, and it gets you into Britannia, and that's the way that Quest of the Avatar starts. All of that didn't show up in the NES port. You just kind of get dumped into the tarot card thing where they ask you to figure out your class by way of the virtue questions, right? Do you choose valor or sacrifice? Do you choose honesty or humility, right? And so that stuff all kind of didn't make it into the Japanese versions of Quest of the Avatar. And in this comic, the character who becomes the Avatar is a native of Britannia. The characters are all changed up. We have actually this character right here, I believe, is the Japanese version of Iolo. Where, if you know who Iolo is from Ultima, Iolo's an old guy. He's actually based on a real person who has an archery school, or had an archery school in Austin. I think he's retired by now, but like. It's just funny that like I was absolutely enamored with all of these things that turned out to be kind of like Japanese interpretations of other countries' things, and for some reason these are the things that really like captured my imagination when I was a kid, without me knowing, right? Like, because after I started learning Japanese, the Sci-Fi Channel started publishing like the Saturday anime thing, and manga started getting bigger in the U.S. at that point, slowly but surely, right? And by then I kind of knew what I was looking at. But all this stuff, my like love of wizardry and Ultima and the Little Prince and stuff, that all came before I knew what any of that stuff was. And so it's just really fascinating to me how like it feels like Destiny. I mean, it can't be Destiny, but at the same time, it feels that way. And I don't know. This is just kind of me ranting about random stuff, but also my love of grid-based dungeon crawlers, which, by the way, I love grid-based dungeon crawlers. But yeah, I don't know. I thought this would be a fun little topic just to show some of the swag that I've gotten from my adventures in like third-hand culture, right? It's an American game that was translated to Japan, and then in Japan the game was taken. So someone took the game as like an inspiration to make a comic, and they totally reinterpreted the story for the comic. So it's totally different kind of thing. We have a French story by a French guy that is then turned into an animation in Japan, which is then Americanized and dubbed over in English and brought over to America. I don't know. It's just weird. It's just really weird. And I just wonder sometimes if there's some kind of like genetic or epigenetic marker for this, because like from a scientific perspective, it doesn't make any sense. All of these coincidences, but there they are. By the way, this Wizardry game actually came out in the US for PS2, and it's really, really good. It's absolutely worth playing, and Experience Inc. has been publishing their stuff here in the US now for a few years. So if you like dungeon crawlers, you might check out some of their stuff, because it's very old school, while still having kind of that veneer of modernity on top of it, just for the aesthetic purposes. But like the classes in Wizardry Zith are basically identical. Or, well, it's weird because Japan got out of Wizardry around Wizardry 6, Bane of the Cosmic Forge. Wizardry 6 and 7 got taken over by John von Canham, I believe, who is one of the guys who was really instrumental in the work on like Might and Magic 3 through 6, I believe. 3 through 5. I don't know if he was still doing it in World, and the kind of the feel of it changed a little bit. And so, like, if you play, I also have there's a Super Nintendo Wizardry. It's called Wizardry Gaiden, and it's called Wizardry Gaiden 4 for some reason. I think maybe because I don't know. There probably were other ones, but like I think the rest of the Gaiden series was the Game Boy series. But like there's this really cool Super Nintendo game called Wizardry Gaiden, which all has like a Japanese aesthetic. Like you're walking through an old bamboo temple. Not bamboo, but it has bamboo and stuff fixings and stuff like that. But it's like Japanese architecture and stuff. And that's a really cool game too. But that's perfectly aside. Anyway, I just thought this was fun. I thought I would kind of mention, my weird penchant for first person dungeon crawlers, and the where did I put it? Oh, it's under here. And this comic is actually like really. I mean, I don't know if it's rare, but certainly it's not super common, and like it's kind of got that 19 like early 90s late 80s aesthetic to it. When was this made? That's a good dang question. Yeah, Japanese publishing is weird. They don't put years on things everywhere like we do here in the US. So I don't know. I don't see a year of publication on it. But it was probably sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. On the spine? No, of course not. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Hopefully you enjoyed my weird digression on the possibility of like an anime gene. I don't know. I thought that was a funny idea, but yeah, it's weird. Like all this stuff is really cool, but like it never made it here to the U.S. because there was way less of a market for these kinds of plodding, slow-paced, dungeon crawlers here in the U.S., especially on consoles. Right? This is kind of one of those things where CRPGs back in the '80s were by their nature pretty slow affairs, and translating that to consoles where you had a bunch of action platformers was kind of a hard sell, I assume, for some people. But anyway, that's all I've got for today. I hope you liked my weird weird tangent, and yeah, well, we'll see what we've got. Maybe I'll have a video tomorrow, maybe not. I'm trying to figure out good topics to have that don't get too repetitive. I've got some reading to do today, so we'll work on that, and maybe I'll have something for you then. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing here on the channel, you know what to do. Yeah, I'll see you next time, whether it be tomorrow or possibly Thursday. Anyway, have a good one.